The Magician of Tiger Castle by Louis Sachar. Anatole is a magician in 16th century Europe, and he lives in a castle that is famous for housing multiple tigers. The Princess Tullia is supposed to marry someone from another kingdom as a strategic alliance between the two kingdoms, but she instead falls in love with one of the castle's scribes, Pito. The king orders Anatole to give Princess Tullia some potion so that she'll fall in love with the other guy and forget about Pito, but the magician Anatole doesn't want to betray her, and he's trying to figure out some way to use his magical potions to make everything work out for everyone. There's something quirky about the setting of this book because it's not a typical fantasy. It takes place in the real world, and it takes place in modern day, in fact, because Anatole is walking around and he visits the Tiger Castle and he's getting a tour of the place, and then it's like a flashback to 500 years ago when he was working there as the magician. This was kind of jarring at first because you have this wizard-like character doing modern-day things, but I ended up liking it in the end, having it with one foot in fantasy, one foot in real events, because he does some clever things with it at the end. As a bit of backstory, I grew up reading this author's books, especially Sideways Stories from Wayside School and Holes, and I really love both of those. They're just so quirky and funny, and I thought it was great. And so when I heard that he was doing his first adult novel with this book, I was excited to see what he would come up with. So reading it was very nostalgic. He has a certain style that I just love, where he just uses a couple of sentences to convey a lot. And that's where the humor and the wittiness of his books really shines. To give a simple example, Anatole is working on his potions and he's talking about everything he wants to do, but nothing's working out. And Pito is looking at his book and he says, "What does this scribbling symbol mean?" And Anatole slammed the book shut. He could have written out Anatole's frustration. He could have put that directly into the scene, but I love how he just puts in like 2 sentences and it conveys the whole scene. Like this author is great at ending chapters with just a little line that makes you smile. He's also great at descriptions. Like, I could tell from reading this book, he was having a lot of fun coming up with all sorts of crazy elements that Anatole is putting in the potions, and how he's like, and different methods, and he's scientific in what he's putting in, and it's just fun to read how inventive this author is just with coming up with stuff. So in that sense, the book was everything I was hoping for. It was fun and interesting and very clever in this author's classic style. The drawback for me of this book, and I don't know if you could call it a drawback because maybe this is just the style of the book, but it doesn't really have a story structure that builds to a climax. It's kind of like you have your characters that are in this situation, then they're in this situation, then they're in this situation. There's not much like a momentum that's leading you to a conclusion where you're holding your breath and seeing what's going to happen. It's much more flat, even though the characters and the situations that they're in are individually interesting. In that way, it's kind of like the Sideways Stories from Wayside School, where you just have a bunch of interesting stories, though in this they're a bit more connected than that. But still, it is strange to go through a novel and the middle of the novel feels very similar to close to the end of the novel. That aside, I still enjoyed going through this adventure that happens to the main characters of the story. Speaking of main characters, there really is just Anatole as the main character, and everyone else, including the prince and princess, when there's a love story there, are really side characters. You really get it from Anatole's perspective, and the meat of the story is Anatole coming across problems, and he's trying to figure it out. And most of the problems are kind of silly, and that kind of makes the book more funny, than any sort of intense drama. Like this is a pretty lighthearted book. But that also means that the love story wasn't particularly deep either. I mean, it was just kind of nice and it connected the dots, but I don't think there was anything particularly memorable about it. Not that it's a huge complaint, because, like I said, it was just overall fun to flow along with the story and see what happens. That's why overall I enjoyed it, and it was very nostalgic. So I'm going to give it 4 stars.